Fox Weather is your Hurricane HQ. Let's get right to the latest on Tropical Storm Erin, this newly formed storm, forecast to become the Atlantic's first hurricane of the season, perhaps eventually first major hurricane. Let's get right to Fox Weather hurricane specialist Bryan Norcross. Bryan, great to have you with us. I know we've been talking about this potential for a while. What was interesting to me, though, watching this over the weekend, big pocket of moisture comes off the African continent. It seems like that low-level center formed right at the northern periphery of that pocket.
Well, it very often does, because the wave is like a wave like that, and the biggest spin is at the top of it. So quite often that happens, and so now that northern spin is kind of broken off in the tropical storm. Now it's out there struggling along. It's going to be really interesting to see what the National Hurricane Center's analysis is later on today. But as we look at it right now, we can see that earlier today, the dark reds in the thunderstorms, that meant they were very tall thunderstorms, now are more subdued, meaning probably that dry, dusty air is getting into it, gumming up the works some, and the thunderstorms are not able to be quite as robust. So we'll see what the Hurricane Center's analysis is later on and see if anything changes here in terms of what they're thinking. But in any case, it looks like it has enough oomph to continue to the west. As of the latest advisory we have, a 45-mile-an-hour estimate, zipping along at 20 miles per hour, which helps the wind, because if it's zooming along to the west at 20 miles an hour like that, it's getting a boost of 20 miles per hour on the northern side, and then on the southern side it's being a minus of 25. So if the total is 45, the storm is only generating 25 of that 45 on the northern side of the circulation. So when they move fast, it helps the storm get going. Here you can see it separating from the moisture down to the south, moving here into the dry air. Let's look at it close up here on the visible picture. There you see where the computer analyzed the center, but that was a couple hours ago. Now it's moving on by that, but it's just kind of a messy thing. It's not obviously very well organized, and it's really hard to pick out cloud elements moving in this direction down here. Whatever wind there is down there is very, very light, but they, in their analysis at the Hurricane Center, they've felt that they had a circulation enough to go ahead and call it a tropical storm, but looks like that was a pretty close call. All right, when we look at the environment around it, look at this. This is like all in here is this plume of dust right here that it's going to have to move through. It's starting to pull a little dust back in here this way. So I would think this is going to slow down the development. The water where it is right now is moderately cool, but it's moving toward warmer water, but it's also moving toward more dust. So we'll see. My sense is that between here and over here, it's going to have slow periods of not intensifying very much. Then maybe it'll find a pocket where it can intensify a lot. And because it's little in size, that means it can be affected more by the dust. The dust can get into it and gum up the works more easily. It doesn't have the oomph to kind of push the dust away. So we'll see how all that develops. But in any case, the official forecast from the Hurricane Center calls for just steady development here, up to 60 miles an hour tomorrow, and then 70, and then skipping ahead to Thursday morning, you see 90, but just steady intensification. You know, like you say, Ian, we end up with a Category 3 hurricane here, the north of the northeastern Caribbean, or in the vicinity of the northeastern Caribbean. We don't know anybody there letting down their guard. Odds say it will be north of the islands, and the worst of the wind will be north of the storm. But it's still too close to call. As I always say, with a developing or a disorganized system, the forecasts are subject to change, and they're forecast to large errors. So we just remember that until this thing gets much better organized and the computer forecasts can peg on something. But for now, the models all agree with the cone, go right down the cone, and we look at the consensus of the models. That's what the National Hurricane Center normally relies on. And so at 5 days, that's where the consensus is there. We have this kind of large area there. Now, when we look at the modern models, the GFS, the European that we've looked at for years, but now we have the Google AI and the European AI called AIFS. And here we are on Saturday, and so this is kind of the end point of the cone. And you notice the clustering is a lot like the cone there. So all that makes sense. When we look at the various ones, we see the Google one concentrates farther south. The dark reds, that's the GFS, a little farther north. Anyway, that together they end up looking like the end of the cone. All right, so what's in play here and what's going on? Well, high pressure right now is driving this thing west, and that's why we expect it to continue more or less to the west, may actually dip a little bit south and then come back north. How much it does that, that's a little bit of an open question on where it ends up down here. Notice the bright reds in there. That's the strongest winds, kind of north on the north side of the system. With the system moving west, you would expect that. All right, what's going to happen Saturday here? Look at this. Cold front comes down, kind of pushes the high this way, opens a bit of a door in here. Okay, where does the door open? Is it there, or is the high a little farther over here? If the system stays weaker longer, the flow is not quite like this. It goes over farther west before it turns, and therefore a lower system, a weaker system, would go farther west. So all those things in play, and that's why we have uncertainty. And when we look at the models way out, so there we are, we're going back to Saturday again. That's where the end of the cone is, looks like that. Now let's go forward in time. It's Sunday, Monday, and you see things are starting to spread out some. The Google AI model is in here. You notice the dark reds are kind of spread all over the place. The red ones are all over the place. That's the European. So lots of options because of exactly where the steering ends up. And then we go on all the way to next Wednesday. You know, we didn't used to look at this far in advance, Ian, but here we have it. So here we'll look at it, but there's no action to be taken. The main point here is there still are some plausible scenarios where a system could somehow impact the U.S. some way. It would probably take something happening that's not forecast, like the system staying weak a long time or something like that. And obviously it's not the consensus of what we're looking at now. And some subset of plausible scenarios still shows a threat to the U.S. East Coast. So obviously we continue to watch it. Ian?
Yeah, going to be interesting to watch. Nobody has to be uncomfortable yet, but you do need to be aware of some of the trends with this. And you said it's on the opposite side of the Atlantic. It's not going to sneak up on us. But Bryan, you had mentioned this tropical storm, the winds only extend out 35 miles from its center. There's a lot that's going to have to happen over the next 7 to 9, 10 days, sure. But over the next 18 hours, a forecast tomorrow morning, 60 miles per hour. We'll see based on these trends this afternoon. It could be a challenge, but long way to go, as you said. That's Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Bryan Norcross. Bryan, we'll be checking back with you all week. Thank you.